Prime Minister Narendra Modi gives new mantra for sustainable development at COP-26 summit in Glasgow. Says life, that is lifestyle for environment, can be the foundation for the same. Prime Minister says India will cut down its net projected carbon emission by 1 billion tonne from now until 2030. India will bring down carbon intensity of its economy by more than 45% by 2030. India will achieve the target of net zero by 2070. PM Modi says International Solar Alliance, a revolutionary step in the direction of solar power, says that climate adaptation. India built a coalition for disaster resilient infrastructure, says it is a sensitive and important initiative to save crores of lives. Prime Minister gives clear message to developed countries that just like India has raised its ambition in setting its targets, they also need to raise ambitions in climate finance and technology transfer. The world cannot achieve newer targets with old goals of climate finance. Welcome to this special presentation on India at COP26. The awaited UN COP26 summit on climate change in Glasgow, UK has been underway, delayed by a year because of COVID-19 pandemic. COP26 aims to keep alive a target of capping global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius above the pre-industrial levels. The limit, scientists say, would avoid its most destructive consequences. Prime Minister Modi, on his arrival, was greeted by British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. All three shared a special moment before attending the first plenary session of the climate summit. Earlier, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres greeted world leaders upon arriving at Glasgow. This was for the Leaders Summit at the start of the United Nations COP26 Climate Summit. Discussions on issues such as climate change, mitigation, adaptation to irreversible environmental impacts caused by climate change and financing to support developing countries in their efforts to move away from fossil fuels had been on the forefront of the summit. Leaders were also seen interacting with one another. It was a musical welcome to the leaders of the world. It was also given along with a short release on the need to tackle climate change.
It's possible that there's only one civilization in the Milky Way galaxy. There may only have ever been one, and there may only ever be one. And that's us. We must consider ourselves and our world to be inconceivably valuable.
And in the opening statement at the second plenary session, Prime Minister gave a new mantra for sustainable development. The word life, Prime Minister's mantra for lifestyle for environment, is inspired by Indian culture, Gandhiji's teachings and Prime Minister's own life to ensure peaceful existence with nature.
ये एक शब्द है लाइफ, LIFE, यानी लाइफस्टाइल फॉर एनवायरमेंट। आज जरूरत है कि हम सभी लोग एक साथ आकर कलेक्टिव पार्टिसिपेशन के साथ लाइफस्टाइल फॉर एनवायरमेंट यानी लाइफ को एक अभियान की तरह आगे बढ़ाएं। ये एनवायरमेंटल कॉन्शियस लाइफस्टाइल का एक मास मूवमेंट बन सकता है। आज आवश्यकता है माइंडलेस और डिस्ट्रक्टिव कंजम्पशन के बजाय माइंडफुल और डेलिबरेट यूटिलाइजेशन की। ये मूवमेंट एक साथ मिलकर ऐसे लक्ष्य तय कर सकता है जो डाइवर्स एरिया जैसे फिशिंग, एग्रीकल्चर, वेलनेस, डाइटरी चॉइसेस, हाउसिंग, पैकेजिंग, हॉस्पिटैलिटी, टूरिज्म, क्लोथिंग, फैशन, वाटर मैनेजमेंट और एनर्जी जैसे अनेक सेक्टर्स में एक क्रांतिकारी बदलाव ला सकता है।
And Prime Minister gave five-fold goals of India, including India's bold step of net zero commitment by the year 2070 and ambitious pledge of achieving 450 gigawatts of installed capacity by 2030.
क्लाइमेट चेंज पर इस वैश्विक मंथन के बीच मैं भारत की ओर से इस चुनौती से निपटने के लिए 5 अमृत तत्व रखना चाहता हूं, पंचामृत की सौगात देना चाहता हूं। पहला, भारत 2030 तक अपनी नॉन फोसिल एनर्जी कैपेसिटी को 500 गीगावाट तक पहुंचाएगा। दूसरा, भारत 2030 तक अपनी 50% एनर्जी रिक्वायरमेंट्स रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी से पूरी करेगा। तीसरा, भारत अब से लेकर 2030 तक के कुल प्रोजेक्टेड कार्बन एमिशन में 1 बिलियन टन की कमी करेगा। चौथा, 2030 तक भारत अपनी अर्थव्यवस्था की कार्बन इंटेंसिटी को 45% से भी कम करेगा। और पांचवा, वर्ष 2070 तक भारत नेट जीरो का लक्ष्य हासिल करेगा।
And delivering the opening address, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson said, "The time is running out and the longer we wait to act, the worse it will become for the world," urging nations to act before it's too late.
We fail to act, the worse it gets, and the higher the price when we are eventually forced by catastrophe to act, because humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock, and we need to act now. If we don't get serious about climate change today, it will be too late for our children to do so tomorrow.
And Boris Johnson also said that world leaders should seize this moment and begin to defuse climate change bomb, turn the tide and begin the fight back.
Let us therefore in the next days devote ourselves to this extraordinary task, so that we not only continue with a programme that is of green industrial revolution that is already creating millions of high-wage, high-skilled jobs in power and technology, taking our economies forward. Let us also do enough to save our planet and our way of life. We may not feel much like James Bond, not all of us necessarily look like James Bond, but we have the opportunity and we have the duty to make this summit the moment when humanity finally began, and I stress began, to defuse that bomb, and to make this the moment when we began irrefutably to turn the tide and to begin the fight back against climate change. Yes, it's going to be hard, but yes, we can do it. And so let's get to work with all the creativity and imagination and goodwill that we possess.
And UN Chief Antonio Guterres stressed that COP26 climate summit must act to save humanity and protect the planet. He added that COP26 must be a moment of solidarity to financial commitments. UN Chief also called on the members to keep alive the 1.5-degree temperature rise goal.
We must keep the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. This requires greater ambition on mitigation and the immediate concrete action to reduce global emissions by 45% by 2030. G20 countries have a particular responsibility as they represent around 80% of emissions. According to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities, in light of national circumstances, developed countries must lead the effort. But emerging economies too must go the extra mile, as their contribution is essential for the effective reduction of emissions. We need maximum ambition from all countries on all fronts to make Glasgow a success.
The UN chief also urged members to act strongly and announced a group of experts who will give standards to realize the zero commitments by non-state actors. He also called actions to protect the vulnerable communities.
We will establish a group of experts to propose clear standards to measure and analyze net zero commitments from non-state actors. Second, we must do more to protect vulnerable communities from the clear and present dangers of climate change. Over the last decade, nearly 4 billion people suffered climate-related disasters. That devastation will only grow. But adaptation works. Early warning systems save lives. Climate-smart agriculture and infrastructure save jobs. And all donors must allocate half their climate finance to adaptation. And public and multilateral development banks should start as soon as possible.
An Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi called for acting decisively against climate change. He was also in favour of involving the youth in the battle against climate change.
We need to speed up our commitment to keep the rise in temperatures below 1.5 degrees. We need to build on the G20 agreement and act faster and more decisively. We must strengthen our efforts in the realm of climate finance. We must bring together the public and the private sector in new ways. This COP26 must be the start of a new momentum, a quantum leap in our fight against climate change. And our youth must be at the center of this process. We intend to turn the Youth for Climate event we held in Milan into a regular feature of all COPs. Future generations will judge us for what we achieve or fail to achieve. We must involve them, listen to them, and above all, learn from them.
Italian Prime Minister further added that the impact of climate change is all too evident. He said climate change has serious repercussions to global peace and security.
Projected rise in global temperatures is set to affect dramatically life on our planet. From catastrophic fires and floods, as we've seen now, to the bleaching of coral reefs, to the loss of biodiversity, the impact of climate change is already all too evident. Its price also rising fast, especially for the poorer nations. The cost of disruptions for households and companies in low and middle income countries amount amounts to a staggering $390 billion a year. Climate change also has serious repercussions on global peace and security.
Moving on, Prime Minister Narendra Modi shared some special moments from COP26 summit on his Twitter handle. He said the summit offers a wonderful opportunity to interact with the various leaders of the world. Let us now take a closer look at the key targets that have been set for COP26 Glasgow.
Countries are being asked to come forward with ambitious 2030 emission reduction targets that align with reaching net zero by the middle of the century. To deliver on these stretching targets, countries will need to accelerate the phase out of coal, curtail deforestation, speed up the switch to electric vehicles, encourage investment in renewables. The climate is already changing and it will continue to change even as nations reduce emissions with devastating effects. At COP26, countries need to work together to enable and encourage countries affected by climate change to protect and restore ecosystems, build defenses, warning systems and resilient infrastructure and agriculture to avoid loss of homes, livelihoods and even lives. To deliver on the first two goals, developed countries must deliver on their promise to mobilize at least $100 billion in climate finance every year by 2020. International finance institutions must play their part and all need to work towards unleashing the trillions in the private and public sector finance required to secure global net zero. Support for developing countries. Developing countries in particular need support, and this must include building new markets for adaptation and mitigation and improving the quantity, quality and access to finance to support communities around the world to take action on the climate change. Task Force on Access to Climate Finance. At the Climate and Developmental Ministerial convened by the UK COP26 presidency on 31st March 2021, participants recognized the urgent need to streamline access to climate finance with greater individual and collective action required both before and following COP26. The Task Force on Access to Climate Finance was announced in response to calls for coherent and effective support for developing countries' efforts to decarbonize their economies, adapt to climate change and establish green growth pathways. Nations can only rise to the challenge of the climate crisis by working together. At COP26, the world must finalize the Paris Rulebook. World nations must find a solution on carbon markets by creating a robust system of carbon credits that support the move to net zero, resolve the issues of transparency by putting in place a universal system that encourages all countries to keep to their commitments, broker an agreement that drives ambition from governments over the coming years to keep 1.5 degrees alive, accelerate action to tackle the climate crisis through collaboration between governments, businesses and civil society. Bureau Report, DD India.
And ahead of the COP26 summit, Prime Minister Modi interacted with members of the Indian diaspora and Scotland, including some young climate innovators from India. He received a special gift at the interaction. More details in this report.
Being a Gujarati, meeting a Prime Minister Gujarati, it was just like a dream come true. उनसे मिलके बात हुआ जैसे साक्षात भगवान का दर्शन हुआ.
People in the future will remember him as the most important Prime Minister of India.
The Prime Minister is absolutely right when you talk about one world, one initiative. Coming from a Sikh background, we have Ek Onkar, like basically there is only one God, and I think we need to make sure that there's only one world we have here, one earth.
The Indian diaspora in Scotland hailing Prime Minister Narendra Modi's leadership. He's in Glasgow for the COP26 summit. Prime Minister will put forth India's views and those of developing nations on climate action, climate innovation, new technology and climate justice. In his first engagement in Glasgow, Prime Minister interacted with young globally recognized climate innovators from India. young Vinisha Umashankar invented a solar ironing cart.
The solar ironing cart, and it aims to clean our air. The problem I'm trying to solve is to eliminate the practice of burning charcoal to heat an iron box for pressing clothes by the vendors.
Prime Minister also met Vidyut Mohan, who is among the winners of the Young Champions of the Earth 2020 award given by the United Nations Environment Agency. Member of Parliament from West Scotland, Pam Gosal, is a Sikh of Indian origin. She hailed Prime Minister Modi's One World, One Initiative motto.
मैं पहली इंडियन है औरत स्कॉटिश पार्लियामेंट में और पहली सिख. I think it's fantastic to see the Prime Minister here in Glasgow at COP26 amongst all the world's leaders. I think the Prime Minister is absolutely right when you talk about one world, one initiative. That's why today that all leaders are coming together to make sure we have that one commitment together. And I think coming from a Sikh background, we have Ek Onkar, like basically there is only one God. And I think we need to make sure that there's only one world we have here, one earth, and we all have an important responsibility.
Professor Nade Hakim, a surgeon and a sculptor of Lebanese origin, presented Prime Minister Modi with a bust he sculpted. A man of detail, the Prime Minister added the finishing touches, placing his spectacles on the gift.
I could not believe my improvisation at the last minute where not having had glasses, because somebody said, where are the glasses? So I took off his own glasses, put it on, which I thought was a good move.
Several other members of the Indian diaspora described Prime Minister Modi as a leader who doesn't hesitate to take tough decisions. They described him and his actions as inspirational.
Prime Minister ki leadership is well known across the world. He is the one who always leads by example. He is the one who is not shied away from taking big decisions, difficult decisions for India.
Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi ji, has handled कोविड क्राइसिस वेरी एफिशिएंटली. उन्होंने जैसे सारे हेल्थ केयर वर्कर्स, फ्रंट वर्कर्स को बहुत अच्छी तरह से मोटिवेट किया.
Indian government, especially under Modi's leadership, has brought all the reforms, and it's going to be great soon for all the people in India. Not only IT, in every sector, India is growing.
योगा तो चल रहा है बहुत सेंचुरी से, बट पॉपुलैरिटी जो उन्होंने क्रिएट की है पूरे वर्ल्ड में, उसके लिए बहुत ही बहुत धन्यवाद मोदी जी को, बिकॉज उसकी वजह से जो है लोग और भी योगा करने लग गए, और इट हैज़ बीन रिकग्नाइज्ड ऑल ओवर द वर्ल्ड.
Whether in Rome or in Glasgow, Prime Minister doesn't miss an opportunity to interact with the Indian diaspora, whom he describes as ambassadors of India across the world. Arun Sharma for DD India.
Let's now get a better understanding of what COP26 is all about and its objectives.
COP26 is the 2021 edition of the United Nations Annual Climate Change Conference. COP stands for Conference of the Parties. Parties are the signatories of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, a treaty agreed in 1994 which has 197 parties, 196 countries and the European Union. The 2021 conference will be the 26th meeting of the parties, which is why it's called as COP26. The United Nations Climate Change Conferences are among the largest international meetings in the world. The negotiations between governments are complex and involve officials from every country in the world as well as representatives from civil society and the global news media. Activities at a COP takes place in two different zones, the blue zone and the green zone. The blue zone is for people registered with the UN body tasked with coordinating the global response to the threat of climate change, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. In the blue zone, you might be part of a national delegation, work for the United Nations and related organizations and agencies, or be a member of the media or non-profit observer organization. In the blue zone, delegates from countries meet for both formal negotiations and informal consultations. The green zone is for the general public. There will be a wide range of events, including workshops, art exhibitions and installations, as well as presentations, demonstrations of technology and musical performances for everyone to attend. The Paris Agreement was agreed at COP21 in 2015. For the first time ever, it saw almost every country around the world enter into a legally binding commitment to reduce emissions. It was top-down in that every country, no matter how big or small, signed up to cutting carbon emissions to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees and ideally to 1.5 degrees above pre-industrial levels. And it was bottom-up in that it left room for each individual country to decide how they would get there. These were called Nationally Determined Contributions, or NDCs. The Paris Agreement also set out ambitious goals on adaptation and on finance. recognizing that many people around the world are already experiencing the impacts of a changing climate and that support financial, technical and capacity building would be needed. At 2 degrees of global warming, there would be widespread and severe impacts on people and nature. A third of the world's population would be regularly exposed to severe heat, leading to health problems and more heat-related deaths. Almost all warm water coral reefs would be destroyed and the Arctic sea ice would melt entirely at least one summer per decade, with devastating impacts on the wildlife and communities they support. At 1.5 degrees Celsius, the impacts would be serious but less severe. There would be lower risks of food and water shortages, lower risks to economic growth and fewer species at risk of extinction. Threats to human health from air pollution, disease, malnutrition and exposure to extreme heat would also be lower. Bureau Report, DD India.
And Union Minister Smriti Irani has urged people to promote vocal for local this Diwali. In a special message, she said that along with adopting Prime Minister's call for vocal for local, keep in mind the message of shopping from shops run by women.
इन्हें कौन नहीं जानता, सुबह से रात तक इनकी दुकानों के बाहर लाइन जो लगी रहती है। कविता आंटी के हाथों से बनी मिठाई के चर्चे दूर दूर तक हैं। मंजू के बुटीक में तो पूरे शहर के कपड़े बनते हैं। अम्मा के दिए आज हर घर रोशन करते हैं। इस दिवाली सब मिलकर देते हैं इन्हें और बढ़ावा, करते हैं अपनी बहनों से भागीदारी। इस त्योहार करें नारी से खरीदारी।
आपने दिवाली की इस खरीदारी के वक्त देखा होगा बाजार में उस महिला को जो दिए या फूल बेच रही है, उसको भी देखा होगा जो दिवाली की डेकोरेशंस बेच रही हो। शायद उसको याद करें जो सलवार सूट सिलने में माहिर हो, जो आपकी पसंदीदा साड़ी आपको दिखाए। इस दिवाली पे जब आप खरीदारी करें, प्रधानमंत्री जी के राष्ट्रीय आह्वान को जरूर स्वीकारें, दैट बी वोकल फॉर लोकल। लेकिन मेरी ओर से एक विशेष आग्रह है कि आप इस दिवाली करें नारी से खरीदारी।
Moving on with number of but we now go across live to MEA press conference on COP26.
A very good evening to all of you present here, and also to those who are joining in from India at this very late hour there. Namaskar and welcome to this special media briefing on the occasion of the visit of our Prime Minister, Shri Narendra Modi, to the United Kingdom, particularly to Glasgow, for the COP26 meeting. We have today with us for Honorable Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla, who has been closely involved with the visit the entire day. We also have with us Madam Gayatri Kumar, High Commissioner of India to the United Kingdom, who has also been involved in this visit. As you know, today was the first day of the Prime Minister's engagement, and we would request Foreign Secretary Sir to give an outline of what happened and what are the major developments that took place, and then perhaps we'll take some questions. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Namaskar, and good evening to all our friends in the media. As you're aware, the Prime Minister reached Glasgow late last evening at the conclusion of the G20 summit in Rome. Today was his first day of engagement in Glasgow. Yesterday, as he arrived in Glasgow, he was received very warmly by members of the Indian community in Glasgow. As he entered the premises here, he was also received by a bagpiper, a Scottish bagpiper. But what is important is that very enthusiastic number of people were here late in the evening to greet the Prime Minister as he entered premises. This morning, you've seen that we had, the Prime Minister had a very, very significant day at the COP26 summit. He participated in a number of events, and I'll go through some of that with you. First thing in the morning, he of course had meetings with representatives and select members of the Indian community, presence of the High Commissioner. In Glasgow, there were also some Indologists. Obviously, numbers were limited due to COVID-19 restrictions, but I think there were a significant number of people nonetheless who interacted with the Prime Minister this morning. The people who were there also included the two winners of the Earthshot Prize. This is a prize that has been instituted at COP26 for people who have made significant innovations in contributing to climate change adaptation mitigation. The two Indian winners, and actually the winner of the Earthshot Prize is an Indian national, and we're all very proud of him. It's Vidyut Mohan. He is the inventor of Taka Charge, which is essentially to do with utilizing utilizing leftovers of paddy fields, stubble that is left in fields. And he called on the Prime Minister this morning and spent some time. Prime Minister also met Vinisha Umashankar, who was one of the finalists, who invented a solar-powered pressing iron, which is very common in India. A lot of the professional people in the laundry business use coal-fired irons, and here is someone who's come up with a solar-powered iron, and she is a finalist also in the Earthshot